Some people pass through a narcissist's life like a breeze, easily replaced, easily forgotten. But you were different. You were the one they couldn't replace, couldn't forget, and couldn't replicate. Because you weren't just any supply. You were the one who saw through their masks and manipulation and still held on to your truth. The narcissist might act like they've moved on. They might flaunt their new source, go radio silent, or pretend you never mattered. But don't be fooled by that silence. Deep down, you still haunt them, like a cut that never heals, like a memory they can't control or erase. And the reason is simple. You brought something they can't find in anyone else: integrity, inner strength, and unshakable self-worth. In today's video, we'll dive into 7 signs that prove you're the one supply the narcissist could never replace. Each sign is a reminder that you are not defined by what hurt you, but by the strength it took to rise above it. If you've ever felt not good enough, not strong enough, or not worthy enough after a toxic relationship, this video is your wake-up call. Don't forget to subscribe and watch until the end, because the truth about who you are and the power you carry deserves to be seen clearly and proudly. Sign number 1. You didn't react to their manipulation, and that shook them to the core. One of the clearest signs that you were the narcissist's irreplaceable supply is that you didn't respond the way they wanted you to. Narcissists are experts at setting emotional traps, half-truths, twisted narratives, passive-aggressive silences, all designed to provoke a reaction. They push your buttons, hoping you'll break down, beg, lash out, or spiral, so they can reclaim the spotlight either as the victim or the one in control. But you didn't. You stayed calm. You chose silence over pleading. You chose to walk away instead of demanding closure. And that threw them completely off balance, because their power doesn't come from what they do, it comes from how others react to it. When you stopped reacting, they lost their stage, and their manipulation lost its power. They had mastered controlling people through guilt, silent treatment, love bombing mixed with cold indifference. But you saw through it. You refused to play. You stopped trying to please them. You stopped walking on eggshells just to keep them comfortable. You stopped chasing validation from someone who never intended to give it. And that is exactly what made you irreplaceable. Because narcissists aren't looking for love, they're looking for control disguised as affection. And you broke that illusion. You didn't respond to their silence with panic. You didn't feed into their jealousy games with rage. You saw the game and chose not to play. In their eyes, you stopped being a puppet, you became untouchable. And to a narcissist, that is the ultimate threat. They'll try to find you in someone else, but all they'll find are those who either blindly comply or explosively rebel. But your calm, your restraint, that can't be replicated. Because it wasn't performative, it came from someone who had faced the fire and learned not to burn. You didn't stop reacting because you stopped feeling. You stopped because you knew reacting only kept the toxic cycle alive. You walked away not from weakness, but from strength, the strength to choose peace over chaos. And in that quiet exit, you reclaimed all the power they tried to steal: your peace, your clarity, your self-worth. Them, they were left spiraling because when there's no reaction to feed off, there's no control to grasp, no drama to twist, no scapegoat to blame. You didn't react, and that's exactly why you're the one they'll never replace. Sign 2. You were the first person who made them face themselves, and they couldn't handle it. There's a painful truth narcissists spend their entire lives avoiding. Beneath their charming, confident, and controlling facade lies a deeply fractured self. They're not as put together as they pretend to be. Behind every manipulative tactic, every blame shift, every misunderstood victim story is a person running from their own reflection. Until they met you, you weren't like the others. You didn't fall for their charm. You didn't ignore the red flags. You didn't play along with the script they'd written for you. Instead, you were real. You observed. You asked questions. You reflected truth back at them, and that terrified them. Not because you insulted them, not because you exposed them publicly, but because you saw them clearly, without illusion, without flattery, and you didn't worship them, nor did you hate them. You simply saw them for who they were and held them accountable. For someone who thrives on manipulation, being truly seen without being able to control the other person's perception is a nightmare. It forces them, even if just for a moment, to confront themselves. No masks, no roles, just them and all the broken pieces they try so hard to hide. And they hate that. That's why they remember you. That's why they can't replace you. It's not because you made things easy. It's because you made them feel something real, a reflection of their inner darkness illuminated by your light. And you didn't use that insight to justify blind forgiveness. You set boundaries. You loved with clarity, not codependence. You kept your dignity intact, even when you recognized their wounds. To a narcissist, that kind of interaction is foreign. They're used to people either enabling their behavior or running from it. But you stood still. You didn't mirror their lies. You didn't crumble when they twisted the truth. You held steady, and in doing so, you reflected a version of them they couldn't manipulate. They couldn't perform around you. They couldn't rewrite the story while you calmly held on to the truth. And in that, they felt exposed not by accusation, but by clarity they couldn't deny. You didn't need to yell. You didn't need to win. You just lived your truth, and that unshakable presence is something no one else in their illusion-filled world can replicate. Sign number 3. You didn't beg for love, and that made them feel invisible. Narcissists feed on admiration. They walk through life as if the world revolves around them, expecting everyone to orbit their ego, praise them endlessly, and submit without question. What they crave isn't connection, it's dependence. They want to be needed, obsessed over, chased after, not loved, worshipped. And then they met you. You loved, but didn't lose yourself. You cared, but didn't beg. You showed up fully and sincerely, but you didn't hand over your emotional power. You were present, but not clingy. You offered affection, but not desperation. You gave love, but not your soul on a leash. And for someone used to being feared, desired, or idolized, your emotional independence wasn't just confusing, it was threatening. You didn't chase their love. You didn't collapse every time they created distance. You didn't rush to fix things every time they withdrew just to test whether you'd panic or plead. Instead, you stood firm. You gave love without sacrificing your peace. You didn't need to be chosen to know your worth, and that alone made you unlike anyone they had ever encountered, because others begged for attention, tolerated manipulation, and settled for crumbs. But not you. You didn't choose between love and dignity, you chose both. You weren't afraid to walk away if staying meant losing yourself. They couldn't comprehend that. They'd never met someone who could love without surrendering, who could care without seeking constant validation. Your presence taught them that real love doesn't come from fear or control, but from strength and freedom, that not everyone stays because they're afraid to leave. That stillness isn't weakness, it's self-respect in motion. You didn't overreact when they went cold. You didn't beg to be enough. You didn't jump through hoops to prove your worth, because you understood this truth. If love has to be begged for, it's no longer love. To a narcissist, that is unbearable. Because if you don't crave their approval, if you don't need their attention to feel whole, then what power do they have left? You didn't beg for love, and that's why they'll never be able to replace you. Sign number 4. You set boundaries and you actually meant them. In the narcissist world, boundaries aren't respected, they're challenged. They don't see your limits as something to honor, but as a game to test. How far can I push before you break? And unfortunately, for many, boundaries are just words. But with you, boundaries were real. They weren't warnings, they were lived values. They weren't negotiable, they were non-negotiable truths. You didn't need to scream, "I won't tolerate this." You didn't wear your standards on your sleeve. You simply embodied them and they felt it. You didn't forgive just to avoid losing someone. You didn't bend your values to keep a toxic connection. You weren't afraid to disappoint someone if it meant staying true to yourself. And that made you a threat. Because narcissists can't control someone who won't bend. They tried every angle, guilt-tripping you into submission, going silent to spark your fear, pretending to change to get you to drop your guard, even seduction, tears, or rage, anything to get you to budge. But every time you held the line, you didn't soften for manipulation. You didn't trade your peace for temporary affection. You didn't give up your values just to keep someone else comfortable. You said no, and more importantly, you followed through. Others may have caved at a well-timed apology or a dramatic display of pain, but not you. You weren't swayed by words, you watched for actions. You didn't get pulled in by, "I promise." You watched for change, and if it didn't show up, neither did you. And that terrified them. Because narcissists don't just hate rejection, they hate being rejected by someone they can't shake. Someone who doesn't flinch. Someone who doesn't need them to feel whole. Someone who refuses to mistake manipulation for love. You didn't lower your standards. You didn't abandon yourself for connection. You didn't confuse pity with partnership. You stood firm, clear, calm, and unshakable. And that presence, that rare emotional backbone, is exactly what made you irreplaceable. Sing number 5. You didn't react from wounds. You responded from self-awareness. Most relationships with narcissists are emotional roller coasters, chaotic cycles where the other person is constantly reacting to the narcissist's mind games, manipulation, and shifting blame. They trigger old wounds, prey on unresolved fears, and pull you into situations where you stop acting like yourself and start reacting from pain. For many, those reactions come from unhealed places. A fear of abandonment, a belief that love must be earned through self-sacrifice, a guilt that surfaces when they try to set boundaries. And narcissists, they know this. They exploit it. They activate your pain responses so they can stay in control. But you were different. You didn't react unconsciously. You paused. You observed. You chose conscious response. You didn't act from your wounds, you acted from self-awareness. When they provoked you, you didn't explode, you asked questions. When they went cold, you didn't panic, you took a step back. When they blamed you, you didn't rush to defend yourself. You responded with clarity and calm. The difference was this: you had done the inner work. You'd faced your vulnerable parts. You'd explored the pain. You'd healed enough to stop needing external validation to feel secure. To a narcissist, that's intolerable, because if they can't trigger your pain, they can't control you. If you're not wounded by their silence, not panicked by their absence, not willing to reshape yourself just to be loved, they lose all leverage. You became an anomaly in their world, someone who no longer acts from fear. And that's exactly what made you irreplaceable. Because you didn't react, you responded. You didn't play the victim to be comforted. You didn't return hurt for hurt. You showed up with mindfulness. And that's something a narcissist can't understand, let alone replicate. Sing number 6. You didn't try to save them. You let them be responsible for themselves. One of the narcissist's most subtle and manipulative tactics is awakening your instinct to heal. They reveal just enough of their pain to draw you in. A tragic childhood, a story of betrayal, a claim that they've never been truly loved. They paint themselves as the wounded soul, the misunderstood survivor, the broken human who just needs the right kind of love. They plant a dangerous hope in you that maybe you'll be the one to save them, that your love will be the one to awaken their change. But you didn't fall for it. You saw the pain, and you didn't make it your job. You didn't let your empathy be used against you. You understood that compassion does not mean unlimited tolerance, and love does not mean enduring endless harm. You didn't try to rescue them from themselves. You didn't take on the role of savior, trying to prove your worth by fixing their damage. You knew with clarity that real change only happens when they choose it themselves. No amount of love can force that choice. To a narcissist, this is infuriating. Most people get stuck in the cycle of feel sorry, try to fix, get hurt, feel guilty. But you didn't enter that loop. You stepped out not because you gave up, but because you knew what was yours to carry and what wasn't. You handed back the responsibility that was never yours. And that is what they hate the most, because suddenly there's no one left to blame, no one to absorb their pain, no one to love them while they destroy you. You let go not because you didn't care, but because you cared about yourself enough to stop bleeding for someone who refused to heal. And that kind of release grounded in self-respect is exactly why you're irreplaceable. Most people either run from the narcissist's darkness or drown in it trying to fix them. But you walked away with the wisdom to say, I see your pain, but your healing is not my responsibility. Sign number 7. Your exit was a statement, not a breakdown. Most people leave a narcissist in pieces, shattered heart, damaged self-worth, questioning their sanity. They walk away in chaos, in tears, or worse, they return, hoping this time will be different. But you didn't just walk away, you chose to leave with awareness and strength. No dramatic goodbye, no despérate peleas, no emotional explosions. Just silence, powerful, intentional, and immovable. And to someone who feeds off emotional reactions, that silence was a death blow. It told them everything you didn't need to say. You saw through them. You were done playing. And your peace mattered more than their approval. Narcissists don't just want to win, they want to control the ending. They want to be the one who discards you, ignores you, walks away looking stronger. But you flipped the script. You didn't wait for an apology. You didn't beg to be understood. You gave yourself the closure they were never going to offer. And that haunted them. Not because you yelled, but because you said nothing. No explanations. No arguments. No final performance. You left whole not because it didn't hurt, but because you refused to let the pain define you. You didn't fail at love. You won at self-respect. You left not to punish them, not to be seen, but to honor your own worth. And in the narcissist's world, where everything is strategy, every emotion is weaponized, and every exit is a power play, your calm, conscious, and dignified departure was something they can't fake, can't recreate, and most of all can't replace. If you've ever asked yourself, why are they still watching me? Why do they still pop up? Still lurk in silence? Still try to recreate what they lost? The answer lies in the 7 signs we just uncovered. You were never meant to be replaced. You weren't temporary supply. You were the one who made them face themselves, the one they couldn't manipulate, couldn't shake, and couldn't forget. You were the rare blend of compassion and boundaries, of real love and deep self-awareness, of powerful silence and conscious departure. And no matter how many times they deny it, distort it, or try to replace you, deep down they know they lost something that can never be duplicated. You don't need their validation. You don't need to be acknowledged. Your presence was already the proof. So if you're watching this with a heart that's been broken, doubted, or told you were too much or not enough, remember this. You weren't weak. You were real. And that's what they could never replicate. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge is not revenge at all, it's peace, clarity, and never looking back. You were the one they couldn't replace, and that is your power.